Avatar Kyoshi was monstrously tall. Some canon sources put her at 6'5" and some even put her at 7 foot. But why was this? Most earthbenders simply never get that tall, and Kyoshi was actually one of a kind, especially in the tribe that she came from. So today we're going to break down all of the canon sources on why Kyoshi might be so tall, and let me tell you, it's going to get weirder than you expect. So hit that subscribe button and let's get into it. The first theory is pretty mystical, but it is that her air nomad blood made her long, while her Earth Kingdom life made her powerful. So as we know from the novels, Kyoshi's mother Jessa was an air nomad. Her father Hark came from the Earth Kingdom. That means that Kyoshi was the child of two cultures with completely different relationships to the body. The air nomads are associated with lightness, movement, breath, agility, and flexibility. The Earth Kingdom characters are usually associated with rootedness, endurance, strength, and robustness. And if you look at Kyoshi, her heritage actually makes a lot of sense. It looks like those two worlds collided. Now, the air nomads themselves are people who lived in mountain temples, they ate strict vegetarian diets, and they practiced asceticism and detachment from physical needs. And according to all the sources we have, they were apparently the tallest and the biggest giants of the four nations. For somehow, despite being in a starved oxygen environment and eating no protein, the air nomads were the biggest of the lot. And that probably comes down to spiritual reasons. We know that the air nomads, one of their sub-bending abilities is obviously spiritual projection, meaning that by default, they are the most spiritual of the four nations. Their bending art is simply the most connected to the spirits. So with that in mind, it's very likely that the spirits actually blessed the air nomad people to have more height than they would have just based on their diet and based on their air conditions. Now, as for why the spirits may have done this, it may have been because of their nomad role. In the early days of the air nomads and for much of their history, they served as peacekeepers who, kind of like Jedi, went around the world and sorted out issues wherever they may have arisen. And that tall stature may have been advantageous to that type of role in the world, and the spirits may have known this, and they may have given the air nomads more height in order to give them more authority when dealing with diplomatic matters. And obviously Kyoshi, as half airbender, would have inherited these traits. Now, the other theory, which is actually quite interesting, is that airbenders literally manipulate the atmosphere around their own bodies. It's not completely absurd to suggest that the air nomads may have developed a reflex just as part of their evolution as airbenders to be able to enrich the air around them and basically eliminate and bypass the effects of hypoxia from living in such high environments. Every other mountain population, both in the Avatar universe and in the real world, basically are shorter because of less oxygen obviously going to their body because they live in thinner atmospheres all the way up there. But the air nomads may have developed a reflex that actually lets them automatically airbend and enrich their air supply so that that's not an issue. And this is actually strongly backed up because we know that in the air nomads, they're pretty much the only population in the Avatar world who has an almost 100% bender rate. In the Earth Kingdom, in the Fire Nation, and the Water Tribe, a lot of people are born without any bending abilities. But according to canon sources, the air nomads are almost 100% benders. There's only some very few rare cases where an air nomad did not end up being born with air bending. And that may have also just been from an airbender marrying an earthbender, and then that happened to not have been passed down from the airbender side. So with Kyoshi's air nomad heritage and culture and genetics, this makes a whole ton of sense. And that leads us on to theory number 2. The hybrid theory. So here's something that most casual fans will actually never realize because this is only found in the books. But Kyoshi is the only confirmed avatar in canon with parents from two different nations. The avatar reincarnation cycle is supposed to rotate cleanly. The Earth Kingdom avatar gets born to an Earth Kingdom mother and an Earth Kingdom father. There's simply no room for error in that cycle. But Kyoshi blows that assumption to pieces. Her mother Jessa was an airbender and her father Hark, as we mentioned earlier, was the earthbender of the family. And he was a thief from a fallen line of Ba Sing Se actors. The avatar spirit somehow chose to incarnate in the only kid in the world born to two different bending traditions at the time. You have to remember, the canon states that none of the other benders and none of the other nations were actually mixed before the time of Avatar Korra. Before the Fire Nation colony started, there were no mixed families in the world. Kyoshi's parents represent a once in a many generations genetic event. And we know from the real world that there's a real biological concept called hybrid vigor, where the offspring of two genetically distinct populations often expresses traits more strongly than either parent group. That offspring tends to come out bigger, hardier, and more longer lived than either side of the family on its own. Now, Kyoshi was, in essence, the first known person of her exact kind. Before that, there was never a combination of an air nomad and an earthbender. So with this hybrid vigor situation, maybe Kyoshi expressed the tall genes from the airbender in a way that was even stronger than ever seen before because of her hybrid nature. Now, not only this, but we know earthbenders actually live longer than the other nations from canon. And what do you know? Kyoshi was the longest living earthbender in canon. So maybe she also expressed that gene and that trait more strongly than ever because of her hybrid nature. Again, this is a really interesting theory and it actually makes a whole lot of sense. And that leads us cleanly onto theory number 3. the vessel built to last. Now, Kyoshi died at the age of 230 according to the novels. That's absolutely huge. She's clearly by far and away the oldest avatar to ever live, at least as far as we know so far. Now, in the real world, very tall people generally live shorter lives. The bigger the body, the more cellular wear and tear, and the earlier the system breaks down. So either Kyoshi defies that pattern entirely, or her tallness was the surface expression of a body engineered biologically to last way longer than a normal human body ever could. And this is actually backed up by one of the most forbidden earthbending abilities ever discovered and ever expressed in Avatar canon. And that was the ability to bend the iron in the cells within yourself to basically become immortal. And this was only done by one man ever in Avatar canon, Tigwe the Immortal. If you want to know more about Tigwe the Immortal and how he might actually be the guru that Aang spoke with at one of the air temples in the original series, make sure you check the video on screen now or in the description below, but I'll give you a little bit of a hint at what Tigwe the Immortal was able to do. Basically, the name he presented to the world was Lao Ge, and he was an Earth Kingdom native who presented himself as a spiritualist and a drunkard, but he is arguably the most efficient and ruthless killer in Earth Nation history. He committed assassinations in order to maintain balance in the world by removing corrupt leaders before they could do irreparable harm. Basically, an ideology that later was picked up by Zahir. But how did he achieve his immortality? Well, his power came from a meditative style of earthbending which allowed him to bend the cells within his body to become immortal. It was said that the practitioner of this art must perform a constant, meticulous mental inventory of their own body. They must visualize every part of themselves down to the smallest bits, aka the cells, and ensure that everything was in its proper place. Basically, you would bend the cells into a position where they were not as old as they were before. This is an absolutely crazy method, and it allowed him to live almost thousands of years. In fact, we don't even know how long he's lived because he's been around for that long. But anyway, it's possible that during the Avatar state, Kyoshi was able to learn this maybe even reflexively or instinctively, and she was able to perform this art on herself. If so, it would make sense how she was able to live so long. But the only question left if she was using this technique is, why did she choose to die at 230 instead of living thousands of years like Tigwe the Immortal? Well, there are some theories that suggest that she had to let the Avatar spirit pass on, and that her body was being more and more corrupted as Rava tried to break free and move to the next Avatar host in the cycle. And that leads us cleanly onto the last theory, the karmic correction. And this is the theory that ties all the others together and starts with Kuruk. To anyone who's only watched the original show, Kuruk is the lazy water tribe avatar that Aang briefly meets in the Spirit Oasis. The one who basically tells him that detachment doesn't work as a foreign policy. But the novels add a much darker layer to that. They reveal that Kuruk was actually fighting a secret war in the spirit world against dark spirits, getting physically and spiritually destroyed by it, while the human world thought that he was just a slacker. He lost his fiancée Umi to the face-stealing spirit Ko, the same Ko that Aang meets in the original show. Now, he died young and broken from a life almost nobody understood. And if you believe that the Avatar spirit reincarnates in a way that responds to the world's actual needs and the previous avatars, then the avatar after Kuruk had to be the exact opposite of him in almost every dimension. Where Kuruk was diminished by his life's work, Kyoshi was enlarged by hers. Kuruk was weak and small, Kyoshi was tall, huge, and strong. Basically, this theory, to sum it up, is that the Avatar spirit Rava made Kyoshi strong, tall, and basically living for a very, very long time because that was what the world needed and because that was the exact opposite of Kuruk. I'd say that this only occurs in very extreme situations when the world really, really needs it, and in cases where the avatar is really in a bad state, and with Kuruk that was the case. The world thought that the avatar was a joke after Kuruk, so Kyoshi corrected that, and she reinstated the name and the reputation of the avatar. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this theory on why Kyoshi is so tall. If you did, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. If you made it this far, drop a thank Mr. Kuruk in the comments down below.